Welcome back to Edible Ed 101. I'm happy to see everyone tonight. How many of you got to play in the snow this last weekend? Anybody? It's pretty remarkable weather we had. I've been looking out at that view for about 23 years and had never seen snow that low or dense. And at the same time, I showed that to a couple of friends, and I think they were in Connecticut or New York, and they said, oh, it's 72 degrees here today. So this is the upside-down climate world we're living in. I went for a walk this morning, and I intentionally left my iPhone behind. You know how much time we spend doing this, right? We're doing this all the time. And so I looked up. There's a little voice in my head say, look up. And these are redwood trees, California redwoods. And at the very tip of the tree, you can see the new growth sprouting. Over there to the right, you see that little red circle. And I thought, wow, that's amazing. That's where the tree is just already March 1st, starting to come alive and grow taller. And how does that work on a redwood tree? So I looked up, and turns out redwood trees actually have two different kinds of leaves. And this was just discovered at UC Davis, like in 2022. The California redwoods are one of the most often studied trees in all of botany. But so there's a peripheral leaf and a axial leaf. And the peripheral leaf on the left is the one that produces food. So it translates sunshine into sugars and feeds the tree. The axial leaf on the right is the one that captures water. So they never knew that the tree actually had two different types of leaves with completely different functions. And it turns out that the tree can switch the leaves on the tree depending on whether it's in a dry place or a wet place. So that's today's fun fact for Edible Ed. For those of you that are coming here for the first time, and we have a lot of special guests tonight, thank you for showing up, my dear friends. We have Annie Boyo, one of our supporters from Toast.org visiting, and I have my colleagues from Hope Lab, this world-class venture studio and place that really focuses on supporting adolescents and young adults with mental health, digital mental health tools. So thank you for coming, Hope Lab. We started the semester thinking about the role of the change maker. This is a Berkeley change maker course. We focus on agency, like how do we actually, as individuals and collectively, play the role of the change maker. Tonight we have a very special change maker, Saru Jayaraman, joining us. And we started the course talking about aesthetics of food, ethics of food, politics, food systems. We had nourishment with Christopher Gardner. Last week we waded into environmental justice and food sovereignty. And this semester we're also focusing, we decided to take kind of create a constraint on our design, and we decided we would just focus on UC Berkeley students, faculty, alumni, and community members who are transforming the food system. So one of the things we've learned, and seems like the most often quoted sentence or sentences in the class, are Michael Pollan's famous words, "Eat food, not too much, mostly plants." I went on a little field trip to Point Reyes a couple weeks ago, and I saw his hand-typed Eater's Manifesto that he signed, and this is kind of the manifesto for his book, Food Rules, and I just picked out a couple that really stood out to me today. Do all your eating at a table, eat slowly. I hope the raisin meditation at the beginning of the class help set that up for you. Eat well-grown foods from healthy soils, and cook if you can, plant a garden. I'm also going to send you an article that appeared yesterday in the New York Times. I think you'll really enjoy it. It's called "I Am Mourning the Loss of Something I Love, McNuggets." It's written by a 24-year-old gentleman who's now an editorial intern at the New York Times. And it's a wonderful kind of personal reflection. The reason I wanted to share it with you because it made me think, wow, some of the reflections that you're all writing right now for this class could turn into op-eds. And this is a story about his experience growing up in the Rio Grande Valley and basically growing up on a diet of ultra-processed foods and coming to recognize during his college years, he went to Yale and he calls it a social education, he got introduced to other foods and talks about how his cravings shifted from McNuggets to lettuce and other fresher foods. And I thought you'd get a kick out of it, so Jackie's going to share that with you. Really only to maybe inspire you about how you might get your own voice out into the world and heard. I was struck that this article made it to the the most frequently shared part of the New York Times opinion section. So to me, that's really exciting that this topic is relevant to that audience. Tonight, we're going to wade into the world of restaurants and kind of take you behind the scenes. And I thought I would introduce you with just a few stats to kind of give you some context about the restaurant industry. Restaurant industry is one of the largest sectors in the United States economy. It accounts for over $600 billion in sales. This is a chart I found really interesting. It only goes from 1970 to 2013, but if you look closely, something remarkable happened between 1970 and the year 2000. And then between 2000 and here, 2008. Just remarkable cultural transformation about the way people were eating in the country. And then this chart is really interesting. This is 2018 through 2021. What happened in March 20? We had a pandemic, which you've heard a lot about in this class. And you can see what happened to restaurant sales. They just nosedived. And as Michael Pollan talked about a couple weeks ago, the whole supply chain of that field kind of crashed. And people had to improvise quite a bit. But look what happened. Look at how it's bounced back from November 2021. Now we're up over $72 billion. I mean, that's a remarkable rebound, isn't it? Then I wanted to share this with you. This is a image that shows the average hourly pay of people in different industries. So on the left are registered nurses. I think this was 2016 numbers, but registered nurses, $32 an hour. This is pre the inflationary boom that we've had. Bookkeeping, accounting, and auditing clerks, $16.62. Moving down, office clerks, laborers, freight, stock, material movers, retail salespersons, close to $12 an hour, stock clerks, waiters and waitresses, they would probably be considered tipped workers, $9.8, and then all the way at the very end, the lowest paid workers, combined food preparation and serving workers, including fast food. That number doesn't include agricultural workers that get you your food. So I think Saru will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think 7 out of the 10 lowest paying jobs in the United States have to do with food and agriculture. So this is a systemic issue, a systemic issue of injustice, and we have one of the great change makers, crusaders, our very own Saru Jayaraman here with us tonight, the founder of One Fair Wage and a number of other organizations. Saru has been a perennial favorite at the class, and she's generous enough to come back every year when I invite her, because when we ask you who are your favorites, you always say, Saru, Saru. But I wanted to do something tonight, just like give you, I like to play the, like the commentator at the sports games to give you like, what should you look for tonight during Saru's talk? So we have this systems change diagram, and you'll recall that we have our biological system, the agricultural system with land and soil and groundwater, the economic system, which is really the engine of commerce that drives this $26 trillion annual business, the political system, the social system, the health system. I put these red arrows here tonight because I think what's really makes Saru's strategy as a change maker really unusual is the coordination of the pressure, influence, cajoling, persuasion that she uses in each of these systems. She really engages a multitude of stakeholders, from legislators and policymakers to get them to reshape laws. She engages the restaurant owners and operators themselves. She engages the restaurant workers as another group of stakeholders. And then she's also engaging the eaters or the consumers too, to think about how their own values and actions align or misalign. So as you listen to her tonight, I want you to think about the different ways that she's influencing these systems, and I'm going to ask you a little bit later to think about how would you go about prioritizing the sequencing of action to create systems change. The other thing I wanted you to do tonight is to look through the lens of what Joseph Campbell would call the hero's journey. Has anybody studied mythology or the hero's journey of? So I think change makers and entrepreneurs actually are a form of hero that goes on a journey. And Joseph Campbell was a wonderful kind of like a cultural anthropologist, and he charted the stages that a hero goes through as she or he embark on this journey. And it starts at home. It starts in the known world. It starts in a place that's familiar, and then evolves into getting a call for adventure. Let's see, can I put that up there? The call. This diagram actually goes counterclockwise like this. So you get a call to adventure. And this schematic or this framework of thinking has been embraced by many great storytellers, including George Lucas. If you've seen any of the Star Wars movies, they follow this arc, or Harry Potter. So you'll find that the hero usually starts off in a familiar place, something comfortable to home, and then something happens, something disruptive happens, and the hero gets a call, like just something resonates inside them that says, I need to do something about this. I need to go check this out. And they go out into the world, and they often pick up some kind of like amulet or talisman or helper along the way. And then they take this leap of crossing the threshold. And the crossing the threshold is here in this diagram, because you're going from the known world. These are like people that you know and that are going to help you. And then you're going into the completely unknown world, like things you've never done before, things you know you're not like qualified to do or trained to do, or that anybody would ask you to do or hire you to do. You just go do it. And you go out and you actually get, you cross this threshold. And this sort of threshold crossing happens usually in a very like strange, unfamiliar place. Like if you remember the Star Wars movie when Luke goes into this crazy bar with all those aliens. Do you remember that scene? That's that moment of like embarkation. You know, all of a sudden you're in a foreign land. Then you get tested, and then you pick up more helpers. People would call that, some people call that stage of helpers as you find a mentor. The mentor is this elder, wise person that's kind of been where you need to go. And then you have like battles and clashes, and then you run away. You want to run away. You're scared. You're getting beat down, and you're about to give up. And then you have this kind of amazing surge of energy to return home. And on the way home, you also meet other obstacles, but you find the elixir of life and purpose that keeps you going. Anyway, that was a long explanation of how I see Saru's heroic journey, but I just wanted you to, I love listening to her story, and her story keeps evolving. The wonderful thing about Edible Ed is we get to actually track the progress and development and challenges of One Fair Wage and its mission and purpose. So without further ado, please welcome Saru.
Thanks, Will. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay, great. How's everybody doing this evening? Good. I'm sorry I was running late from my class, so my throat might be
There's some water right
sore.
there.
Thank you from doing all this talking for hours and hours. I teach social movements, organizing, and public policy here at Berkeley. I've been teaching it for about 10 years. And I teach it every semester, so if people want to learn more about the kind of work that I do, that's a good class to take. So a little bit of background first about me and how I got into this work. I grew up in, I was born in Rochester, New York. My family came out west when I was little, ended up at UCLA as an undergrad, and then went back east for law school and graduate school. And I was in my last year, no, that's not true. I had left law school and was starting to work at an immigrant worker organizing center out in Long Island, New York, when 9/11 happened. On September 11th, there was a restaurant at the top of the World Trade Center, Tower 1, on the 107th and 108th floors of Tower 1. We just actually commemorated the 20th anniversary of 9/11 a couple years ago. Many of you may not have been conscious at the time that it happened, but there was this restaurant on the top 2 floors of Tower 1. And on that morning, 73 workers died in the restaurant. They either jumped to their deaths from the 107th, 108th floor, or they were literally evaporated inside the restaurant because the plane hit below them, and the doors to get to the rooftop where they might have been rescued by circling helicopters were locked. And so they couldn't get out, and they were trapped in the restaurant, and they were basically evaporated because the heat rose from the planes, and there was no real escape. You may see images from 9/11 of people jumping from the 107th and 108th floor with tablecloths or large napkins. Those were the windows workers trying to somehow save themselves. So following the tragedy, I was asked, I was a very young, inexperienced organizer, and attorney, I was asked to start a relief center in the aftermath of the tragedy with the workers who had lost their jobs at Windows on the World, about 250 of them, and the families of the 73 victims. And we initially started helping workers get back on their feet, find new jobs, but what started as a relief center post 9/11 grew very quickly into an organization fighting to raise wages and working conditions in the restaurant industry. And that is because the Windows on the World workers were actually unionized. Windows on the World was one of under, I would say, 50, maybe 75 unionized restaurants in the United States out of 1 million restaurants in the US. Under 100 are unionized. So it's like 0.0001% of restaurant workers are unionized. That particular restaurant had a union, and the workers from Windows on the World, when they lost their jobs, and started organizing with me, pretty quickly realized that nothing in the restaurant industry outside of Windows was nearly as good of a job as what they had at Windows. It was mostly all much, much worse. And so we started organizing, we started fighting to raise wages and working conditions in the restaurant industry. And what started in New York City then grew very quickly all over the country. A couple of years later, when Hurricane Katrina happened, workers approached us from New Orleans and said, you created something out of tragedy in New York. Help us as restaurant workers of New Orleans create something out of tragedy in New Orleans. And it grew like that all over the country. And I was always doing two things at the same time. I was always an organizer, and I keep using this word organizer and organizing. And I mean something very, very specific when I say those words. I am not talking about organizing like you organize your closet. I'm not talking about organizing a coalition. I'm not talking about organizing an electoral campaign. The organizing that I have done for 20 years and that I teach here at UC Berkeley has a very specific definition. We distinguish it from other kinds of social change. It's not activism, it's not advocacy, it's not services, it's organizing. Organizing is collective action led by the people most impacted who are taking direct action to confront those who have power over their lives, to change the balance of power between they who do not have power and the people who have power over them. So first difference between other kinds of social change is that it's collective. It's not one person fighting for something. It's not me or any lawyer or any service provider or any advocate. Although we'll put the picture up of the hero, the true hero in the story is not me, it's the workers. It's restaurant workers. They are the protagonists in their own struggle. As organizers, it's collective action led by the people most impacted. That's what makes organizing different. We don't fight for people, they fight for themselves, collectively. So it's collective action led by the people most impacted, directly targeting those in power. Directly targeting means the kind of work we do is we don't lobby, we do lobby, but we mostly, our main work is not lobbying, it's not asking people for things, it's not what can I say, it's not providing people things, it's actually people coming together and demanding things collectively that they feel are their rights as human beings, that they should have as human beings. So it's confronting people directly, confronting people in power. That means a group of workers going to the steps of a state capitol and holding an action and saying, we demand change. And the ultimate goal of organizing is not just to win a policy or to win a change, it's to change the balance of power between those who have power and those who don't have power. So in organizing, we say, even if I win an increase to the minimum wage, which is what I fight for all the time, if I just win that policy, but I haven't grown the number of people engaged and the amount of power we have in the state legislature to take on the next fight, then I have failed. It isn't just about winning change, it is about changing the balance of power between those who have it and those who don't. So that's organizing. That's what I do on a daily basis. And that's what we started to do, restaurant workers and I, the restaurant workers who lost their jobs at Windows on the World, and I, shortly after 9/11, we started organizing. We started talking to other workers to see what should we organize around. There's so many problems in the restaurant industry. I'm going to talk about many of them tonight. But what should we organize around? And the way that we did it is through a methodology that we call participatory research. I've always been an academic and an organizer at the same time. As an academic, you learn, how do you assess what a majority of people want? You do research. As an organizer, you realize the best people to do the research are the people who know the actual problem, the people who live the experiences themselves, the workers. So we engage in what's called participatory research, where we train workers to conduct surveys of their fellow workers, to learn. We don't need an outside academic to come ask workers what they need. Workers can ask each other, what do we need, what do we want? And so through this participatory research method, we ended up conducting, 20,000 surveys with workers in cities across America. And everywhere we went, we would ask people, what are your top needs and concerns? And everywhere we went, workers in this industry, the restaurant industry, would say, it's my wages, it's my wages, it's my wages. I feel like saying, it's my wages, dummy, because it's so obvious. But until you know the data, you don't understand why. Why do workers in this industry keep, there's lots of problems. How many people here have ever worked in restaurants? I'm sure everybody here can name a laundry list of issues in restaurants, from sexual harassment to racial inequity to health and safety issues to no control over your time to the instability of the lifestyle to mental health issues and addiction. I could go on and on and on. But when we asked workers everywhere around the country, what are your top needs and concerns, everywhere they said over and over and over again, their wages. And so as an academic, or as anybody with a curious mind, you might ask why. Why do they keep referring to their wages? So whenever we did participatory research, we were also examining the government data, the sources of government data that tell us what's happening at a macro level. And what we saw in the government data is that the restaurant industry has been one of the largest and fastest growing private sector employers in the United States of America for decades. It is the absolute largest segment of the food system. So Will mentioned that the 7 lowest paying jobs they're actually in the restaurant industry. The 8 lowest paying jobs in the United States are all in food. The 8th lowest, behind restaurant workers, is farm workers. The 7 absolute lowest are in the restaurant. So 8 out of 10 jobs in the United States that are the lowest paying jobs are in the restaurant industry. But if you zoom out are in the food system. If you zoom out to the whole food system, that's 20 million workers in the United States. That's about 1 in 6 workers in the US, 1 in 5 private sector workers works in food. Of that 20 million, 14 million work in restaurants. So the restaurant industry is both the largest segment of the food system and the second largest private sector employer in the United States, period, and the #1 fastest growing employer in the US. The restaurant workforce grows faster than any other segment of healthcare, education. Restaurant jobs are growing faster than any other jobs in the US, and they happen to be the absolute lowest paying jobs in the country and in the food system. So what does it mean for America as a country if the largest and fastest growing private sector employer in the US is also the absolute lowest paying employer in the country? It means that the restaurant industry and the food system are single-handedly driving the depression of wages in the United States of America. Because if you think about it, if the largest and fastest growing sector, the one that's growing the fastest, adding the most jobs, is providing the lowest paying jobs in the country, that means increasingly over time, it's low paying jobs that are being added to the economy. We are now way past 1 in 3 working Americans in the US working full-time and living in poverty. We are getting very close to 1 in 2 working Americans, nearly half of all working America working full-time. These are not unemployed people. These are working people working full-time and living in poverty. Nearly half. In the wealthiest nation on earth, nearly half of the people who have jobs, who are doing what everybody tells them they should do. Work hard, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. They're working 2 and 3 jobs, and they're still living in poverty, and they're still accessing the highest levels of public benefits of any workforce in the United States of America. Restaurant workers use food stamps at double the rate of the rest of the US workforce, which leads us to the very ironic situation in which the people who feed us, who put food on our tables in America, cannot actually afford to feed their own families, can't put food on their own families' tables. So you have to ask yourself, how did we get to this point where the largest and fastest growing industry in America has the absolute lowest paying jobs in America? Well, it is not an accident, it is not organic, it is a very intentional system that has been created with very deep roots in our extremely ugly racist history in the United States of America. So tipping as a practice originated in feudal Europe. It was something that aristocrats and nobles gave to serfs and vassals, but always on top of a wage. If you watch or read any old English literature, you watch period pieces, maybe you watched Bridgerton or Downton Abbey or any of these pieces, you will see references to tipping. It was what rich people gave their inferiors, their subordinates. but always on top of a wage. Serfs in feudal Europe got full wages. Tips were on top of that wage. Tips were on top of a salary. The idea came to the States in the 1850s when rich Americans started traveling to Europe and coming back and trying to show off that they knew the rules of Europe. And Americans at first resoundingly rejected tipping. They hated it. They said, this is a vestige of feudalism. We're a democracy. No tipping. Employers should pay their workers. 7 states passed bans on tipping because they hated it so much. But something happened in 1853. In 1853, waiters in the US, who are mostly white men, who got wages, and there were no tips. There were no tips in 1853. So waiters were white men with no tips, wages only, working in cities like Chicago and Philadelphia and New York and Boston, went on strike, a big collective strike. They said, our wages are too low, we need higher wages. They went on strike. And restaurants responded to this strike by looking for, they did not want to pay these white men more, they looked for cheaper labor. At first, they thought, let's replace them all with women. Let's replace them all with white women. They started replacing servers in America with white women. And then, 10 years later, an even better opportunity came along to access even cheaper labor, which was called emancipation. Emancipation actually happened in 1863, but as you know, the slaves did not find out they were free until 1865. And after 1865, restaurants saw an incredible opportunity to access not just cheaper labor, but free labor. By telling black people, black women in particular, we're going to hire you for free and let you live on this new thing that has just come from Europe called tips. You're going to have the amazing privilege and opportunity of accessing white people's tips. In some cases, restaurants and service employers charged black workers for the privilege of obtaining white people's tips. No wage. There were 2 industries in particular that did this. One was called the Pullman Train Company. The other was the restaurant industry. The Pullman Train Company were luxury trains that ran from East Coast to West Coast and back. They were headquartered in Chicago, and they hired tens of thousands of black men, called them all George, because they didn't believe that they were humans, called them all George, and said, we're going to hire you for nothing and make you live on tips. There's a wonderful movie I encourage everybody to watch called 10,000 Black Men Named George, which is the story of these black men who organized the first black union in the United States under the leadership of a man named A. Philip Randolph in Chicago in the early 1900s and won the right to an actual wage rather than living on tips. The restaurant industry in Chicago watched this with horror. These black people are organizing for an actual wage. What if our employees in restaurants started to do that? They were mostly black women. And so in 1919, in response to the Pullman car porters organizing, the National Restaurant Association formed in Chicago in 1919 with the express mission, intent, and purpose of maintaining free labor, particularly free black labor, in the restaurant industry. That was their goal. That was their intent. In fact, they had 2 industries they were trying to suppress black workers' wages in. One was the restaurant industry, and the other was farm labor. The other was agriculture. It was black workers working in both sectors. So, formed in 1919 with the goal of ensuring that what happened to the Pullman car porters never happened in the food sector, and 20 years later in 1938, when FDR passed the New Deal, and everybody got the right to a federal minimum wage for the first time, the Restaurant Association succeeded in their goal of ensuring that both tipped workers, restaurant workers, and farm workers were excluded from the New Deal, did not get the minimum wage that everybody else got. So they were already doing well, batting 100. The rest, we call it the other NRA, the National Restaurant Association. They've been around since 1919 with this purpose of maintaining free labor. They won it in 1938. In the 60s, finally, during the Civil Rights Movement, tipped workers were granted 50% of the minimum wage. We were so gracious, we said to these workers who are still mostly women, still disproportionately women of color, you can have 50% of the wage. But in 1991 was the last time the minimum wage for tipped workers went up from $1.83 to $2.13 an hour. In 1996, I would love to use that instead. Is that okay? Thank you. Herman Cain was the head of the other NRA in 1996. The minimum wage went up in 1996 for everybody else. Herman Cain struck a deal with Clinton and the Democrats in Congress that the minimum wage could go up for everybody else as long as tipped workers remain frozen forever at $2.13 an hour. And there they have been. That is the federal minimum wage for tipped workers in the United States of America in 2023, $2.13 an hour. Now, you might say to yourself, that's a ridiculous wage, but it's probably only a small group of people who get it. This is kind of just like a marginal group of people, marginalized group of people. I started this talk telling you this is the largest and fastest growing industry in America. This is the largest employer of women. This is the largest employer of people of color, largest employer of immigrants, largest employer of formerly incarcerated workers, largest employer of young people, largest employer, period, gets to pay $2.13 an hour because of a legacy of slavery that we have allowed a trade lobby to maintain. And today, tipped workers in the United States of America are overwhelmingly women. Over 70% of tipped workers are women. They're mostly women, single moms working in very casual restaurants and bars in Applebee's and IHOP and Denny's and Olive Garden, struggling with 3 times the poverty rate of other workers, using food stamps at double the rate of other workers, and experiencing the absolute highest rates of sexual harassment of any industry in the United States of America, because they have to put up with so much to get those tips. There have always been 7 states that did it differently: California, Oregon, Washington, Nevada, Minnesota, Montana, and Alaska. Anywhere from 30 to 50 years ago, those 7 states decided to reject this system and require full minimum wage with tips on top. And if you listen to the other NRA, you would think California has absolutely no restaurants, because when I'm leaving in a few hours to go testify in the Maryland State Legislature. I'm leaving on a midnight flight, getting in at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning, and testifying in the Maryland State Legislature, where the wage is $3.63 an hour. And when I go testify in Maryland, they say things like, well, I don't want to hear about California, it's an alien planet. They also say, well, you know, the Restaurant Association will show up tomorrow in the legislature when I'm there and say, if we had to pay $15 plus tips, everything would collapse. Restaurants would fall through a sinkhole in the ground. Jobs would be lost. People would be laid off. Tips would go away. It would be disaster as we know it. And I would have been in California, where we are about to go eat in a restaurant. I would have been in California just 5 hours earlier, 6 hours earlier, experiencing the largest and fastest growing industry, restaurant industry of any state in the United States. Why? Why is it that California pays people a full minimum wage with tips on top, and actually the opposite is true? Restaurants are growing faster here than anywhere else in the country. You don't have to take it from me. The CFO of Denny's in 2021 said it best. In early 2021, we were working with President Biden and Bernie Sanders and Bobby Scott in the House to move a bill called the Raise the Wage Act, which would have raised the minimum wage to $15 and ended the sub-minimum wage for tipped workers. And at that time, the Restaurant Association was fighting us hard, saying, can't be done, businesses will go out of, restaurants will fail, blah, 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 blah. And Denny's was a big part of that. Denny's is a leader in the national and the other NRA. In that same moment, a Newsweek reporter caught the CFO of Denny's telling shareholders of Denny's in a quarterly shareholder call, it's going to be okay when they pass this bill, because Denny's in California, where the wage is $15.50 an hour, where we pay that to servers, Denny's California is outperforming the system. Denny's California is growing faster than Denny's anywhere else in the country. He said, why? Because we pay our people better, and guess what they do? They go eat in Denny's. They take their families to eat in Denny's. Consumer spending is up because we pay our people better. What I think most of America that doesn't work in restaurants fails to realize is that restaurant workers are human beings who consume. And when you've got the largest workforce in America, unable to feed their own children, they are not able to consume in restaurants. Once you pay them a livable wage, they immediately go eat out, just like the rest of us. They take their families, they consume, consumption is up, restaurants do better. Every measure is better in these 7 states. higher restaurant sales per capita in the 7 states, higher job growth in the restaurant industry, higher small business growth rates. Tipping is higher in the states that pay a full minimum wage with tips on top. And sexual harassment is cut in half. Why? Because when you pay a woman a full minimum wage, she doesn't have to put up as much with her customers. She can say buzz off if somebody tries to harass her or touch her. She can count on a wage from her boss like every other worker in every other industry. It's not that she doesn't get tips. It's that she's not completely dependent on those tips to feed her kids. Has anybody here ever worked in a restaurant in a state other than California, another state, where you paid 2 or 3 or that sub-minimum wage? Do you remember what your paycheck said about the wage? No. Most workers who get that sub-minimum wage, they actually get a paycheck, especially pre-credit card processing, that says this is not a paycheck. It says 0, because your wages are so low they go entirely to taxes, and you literally live off your tips and nothing else. And when you live off your tips, you are totally dependent on what the customer might do to you, what they say to you, how they touch you or treat you or talk to you. Whereas in states like California, you can actually say, buzz off, not that I don't want your tip, but I don't need to put up with what you're doing to me because I can actually rely on a wage from my boss. So that was all pre-pandemic. It was already a problem. It was a racial inequity. It was a source of gender discrimination, sexual harassment, and poverty pre-pandemic. With the pandemic, everything has changed. In March of 2020, 6 million restaurant workers lost their jobs. We started a relief fund for restaurant workers, unexpectedly raised $24 million. 300,000 workers came to us for relief. We gave it all out to these 300,000 workers, and we started surveying them, understanding their needs. I told you I'm an academic. We engage in participatory research. We started surveying these workers who were coming to us for relief during the pandemic. First, they told us, 2/3 of tipped workers told us they actually couldn't access unemployment insurance because in most states they were told their wages were too low to qualify for benefits. And then they went back to work in the summer of 2020 when all of us started enjoying outdoor dining with, I don't know if you remember the outdoor sheds and the outdoor dining in summer of 2020. And they told us, look, our tips have gone way down because sales are down. Harassment, which was already higher in our industry than in any other industry, has gone way up. Thousands of women told us, I'm regularly asked, take off your mask so I can see how cute you are before I decide how much to tip you. Take off your mask so I can see the pretty face of my server before I decide how much I want to tip. And take off your mask so I can stick my tongue down your throat. We heard, these are real comments, I didn't make them up. We in fact received thousands of comments from women who were told this regularly, take off your mask. It obliterated the idea that tipping was correlated with the quality of service in the United States. I know many of you may feel that about your service experience. I'm sure you were excellent servers. But the data in America, the irrefutable data, shows that in fact tipping is not correlated with the quality of service. Tipping in America is correlated with the race and gender of the server. If you're a man, you get tipped more if you do not touch the person, but you always get tipped more, period. If you're a woman, you get tipped more if you allow yourself to be touched. This is all genuine data coming out of Cornell. There's a professor there named Michael Lynn who spent his life studying tipping patterns. And he's taken huge amounts of tipping data from large corporate restaurant chains. And what they find is that even when a black woman provides what's called perfect service, standing alongside a white man in a fine dining restaurant, she will always get tipped less. And that results in a $6 per hour wage gap between black women tipped workers and white men tipped workers across the country. Because we all have something called implicit bias as customers. Implicit bias, if you don't know what it is, I encourage you to go look it up and take a very quick test that Harvard University has created to understand all of us have implicit biases, no matter our race, no matter our gender. All of us have implicit biases in our heads that have come from growing up in this country and seeing images and hearing things on TV and hearing our peers and what they say about race and gender. So we all have implicit bias. That implicit bias results in customers generally tipping women less and people of color less, and women of color least of all. And so during the pandemic, when women were told, take off your mask so I can see how cute you are before I decide how much to tip you, it obliterated the idea that tipping was based on the quality of her service, how good of a job she did, her merit, her hard work. And instead it showed, in fact, it was based on whether the man found her face pretty enough or pleasing enough. And so these women were put in this impossible position of, do I expose myself and my children to the virus for the chance that he might like my face? And then it got even worse when they were asked to enforce COVID protocols on the very same people from whom they had to get tips. Sit 6 feet apart, wear a mask, show me your vaccination card, on the same people from whom they had to get tips. It was an impossible situation. 1.2 million workers have left the industry. And of those who remain, 60% say they're leaving. Of those who remain, 60% say they're leaving. 80% say the only thing that would make them come back to work is a full livable wage with tips on top. And so the first time since emancipation, we are seeing masses of workers reject this legacy of slavery. For the first time since emancipation, it's an incredibly historic, revolutionary moment where thousands of restaurants across the country that used to fight us violently, I have received any number of death threats over my 20 years of working on this issue. My children's pictures have been put up on attack websites. The Restaurant Association regularly follows me around the country with digital ad trucks denouncing me. They follow me as I walk around the country. It's ridiculous, the level of bullying behavior they've engaged in to try to shut us down. And yet, so many restaurants who fought us over the years are now paying this. We're seeing restaurants in Dallas, Texas that used to pay $2.13 now paying $20 and $25 plus tips. We're seeing restaurants in Massachusetts that used to pay $5 in Cape Cod now paying $50 an hour plus tips because ain't nobody going out to Cape Cod for $5 anymore. People are refusing to work for sub-minimum wages for the first time since emancipation, and as a result, restaurants are raising wages dramatically across the country. And in that moment of true revolution, we decided it was time to go big. Will told you that we have been fighting on this issue for 20 years. We've won, and then we've lost. We've won and been pushed back by the Restaurant Association and beat up and punched and still kept fighting. And finally, this past year, as a result of this mass upheaval, so many workers saying, I'm done, so many restaurants actually joining forces with us. We've had an association of restaurant owners who agree with us. It was 800 restaurants pre-pandemic. It's 2,500 restaurants today. It includes restaurants like Danny Myers and David Chang and Tom Colicchio and, of course, Alice Waters. But it also includes mom and pop restaurants all over the country that actually believe that paying people a livable wage helps the bottom line. They don't do it in spite of wanting to achieve profitability. They do it in order to achieve profitability. Because what they see is that paying people a livable wage, guess what? Reduces employee turnover. We have the highest rates of employee turnover of any industry in the United States. It's 300%. That's 3 turns in one position in 1 year. That means you have to retrain, rehire, recruit, find new people 3 times a year. And we've calculated that that costs restaurant companies millions of dollars that go down the drain. If they only paid their people better, we find you can cut turnover in half. People actually stay once you pay them. I am sure many of you have made decisions about whether to take jobs or stay in jobs based on how much you are paid, and restaurant workers are no different. So turnover goes down, and so many employers agreed with us even pre-pandemic, about 1,000, but it's doubled. 2,500 restaurants today that are working with us, actually moving legislation, and we decided it was time to go big. And so we are moving, we have a campaign called 25 by 250. We're moving legislation and ballot measures in 25 states, half the country, by the United States' 250th anniversary, which is 2026. It's the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. We are fighting to declare independence from these legacies of slavery and these structures of inequality, and that is why we are winning. So last year, after fighting and fighting and fighting, we finally won Michigan. Michigan became the 8th state to end the sub-minimum wage for tipped workers last year. And in November, on Election Day, in our nation's capital, Washington, D.C., 76% of voters voted to end the sub-minimum wage for tipped workers and raise tipped workers' wages from $5 to $16.75 plus tips. And so Washington, D.C. has joined with 8 other states, California included, in ending this legacy of slavery. And this year, we have 10 states moving legislation on this issue, including Maryland, where I'm flying to overnight, and then another 5 states that have it on the ballot in 2024, including red states like Ohio and Arizona and Idaho have this on the ballot in 24. This is a moving train. It's a train that is inevitable. It's a future for the industry that is inevitable. I will close because I know we need to move on, but I was sharing with Will that there's kind of this moment of, I don't know, a very surreal moment for me, because I have been fighting the National Restaurant Association for so long, and a couple of things have happened in the last few months that are kind of crazy. So the first thing that's happened is that we're winning, and in the context of us winning, we were able to expose this incredible scam that the Restaurant Association has perpetrated on restaurant workers for decades. So at the height of my attack, the Restaurant Association attacking me in 2018, it got really bad. They had put my 2-year-old baby's pictures up on attack websites. They took out full-page ads in USA Today, Wall Street Journal, driving people to those websites. Like I said, they're following me around the country. Celebrities who are working with us through Me Too, they went after them to their homes and their businesses, scaring them off. They went to our foundation funders' homes and told them to stop funding us. It was hard times, and in the middle of that, somebody inside the NRA with a conscience leaked me some documents. And the documents showed the NRA emails that they had been sharing with each other, congratulating themselves that a majority of the lobbying dollars they used to lobby to keep the wage at $2 didn't actually come from the member corporations like IHOP and Denny's and Applebee's, as we had always thought. No, it came from workers, because they had created a company, a monopoly company called ServSafe. And they had gone around to various states, basically lobbying states to pass legislation requiring every restaurant worker in those states to take this training, ballooning their lobbying budget to $80 million a year that they then used to fight those same workers' wage increases. So if any of you worked in the restaurant industry in California, you most likely had to take ServSafe. And they took that money from you, which you never should have paid in the first. If you've taken ServSafe, you know it's a pretty idiotic training. You don't need it. Common sense tells you wear gloves, don't keep meat out in a certain temperature. You don't need it. But it was created with the intent of ballooning lobbying dollars to maintain workers' wages at $2.13 an hour. So we uncovered this, and in the height of our winning in the last year, I was able to connect with reporters at the New York Times who took it on as a huge investigative story, and it landed on the cover of the New York Times in January as a huge expose, and now we're working with Congress members to go after the NRA and basically dismantle the scheme. There's a bill moving now in California to change it so that employers have to pay for that training, not workers, and cutting off this revenue stream. So that was one crazy thing that happened, but the other crazy thing that happened is that the industry has started to basically collapse because they don't have enough staff. And they are suddenly, for the first time in generations since emancipation, open to the possibility of change. So much so that yesterday I was invited to keynote this conference called VIBE, Very Important Beverage Executives. It's the beverage directors of all the major chains that belong to the NRA. IHOP, Denny's, Applebee's, Outback, Chili's, all their beverage directors, and all the directors of the liquor companies that sell to the restaurants were all there in this huge conference, 500 to 1,000 people, and they asked me, their arch nemesis, to come keynote their conference because they said, we don't know what we're going to do, we don't have enough staff. We can't find people. So they were actually open to hearing what I had to say for the first time ever about what you need to do to find staff, to recruit them and retain them. It's very, very simple. You have to pay them. You have to pay them, first of all, you have to pay them an actual wage, because this industry doesn't pay people an actual wage. They pay them what we call a sub-minimum wage. They make them live on tips. And second of all, you have to actually provide that wage as a guarantee, not as something you might pay now and go back down to $2 next year. It has to be the law. Otherwise, workers won't trust that it's worth coming back to work in restaurants. So now I'm being asked to keynote in all of these places where before we were fighting, It's a new moment. What I said to Vibe yesterday is that I do see a beautiful future. We might have been on opposite sides of the table before, but there's this historic moment and a moment of incredible opportunity, a moment of change, historic change, and a beautiful possible future for this industry where people could actually feed their families, have a house, have a car, maybe send their children to college, maybe actually see this industry as a profession. Because for so long we have dismissed these workers as low wage and low skill, and I just reject that wholesale because anybody who's worked in the industry knows these are high-skilled jobs. They may be low wage, but they are high-skill professions. You can go to school for many years in Europe to be a hospitality professional. The only reason it's not seen as a profession or a real career here in the United States is because of a historic legacy of slavery that results in the way it's paid, not because of the value of the work that people do in this industry. You can go to Cordon Bleu not just to be a chef, you know, but to be a server, to be a manager, to be a sommelier, you can go to Cordon Bleu to work in the industry not just as an owner, not just as a chef, because workers in this industry in Europe are seen as professionals. And that is what we are, that's the beautiful future I see for this industry, working together with independent restaurants and workers and legislators and all of you. That is the future I think is totally possible. Thanks.
Thank you, Saru. Thank you. I think what we'll do is we'll take just like a 7-minute break, just stretch break, and then come back, and we'll have a little opportunity for you to converse, and then we'll be in conversation with Saru. If you have, you're welcome to come to the microphone to talk to Saru, or you can put questions up on the board for her as well. I should bring my bell. Okay, may I have your attention back? Thank you. Keep feeding the feedback to Max and Arbel. If you have suggestions for us too, for things that you've enjoyed, we're all ears and welcome that. We have 2 mics here, one down here and one up there if you'd like to come ask a question. I've got a bunch of questions here that people have sent, which I'll relay to Saru. One of the things I wanted to start off on, Saru mentioned the conflict. She says it quickly, but when you talk about, they put my daughter's picture up, they followed me around. A student in the class discovered a website that it calls you a hypocrite, and it's like the We Hate Saru website. It's a pretty amazing website. It's black, and it has like, I don't know, I'm not describing this right, but it like had a skull and crossbones on it or something, or.
Oh, there's multiple.
Okay, there's multiple. Okay, so, but let's just talk about that one because it's really interesting what they did. And I want to talk about this in the context of like this post-truth world we're living in now, where information is being manufactured, faked. You can't tell the difference between a computer-generated image and one that's true. So I'm wondering, like, especially if you're a student now, how you develop the acuity and the discernment around things that are intentionally made to kind of shape your perspective, your opinion, and shock your nervous system. So this website calls you all kinds of names and hypocrite, and then at the bottom it says a project of the Employment Policy Institute. So when the student sent that to me, I looked up Employment Policy Institute, and turns out the Employment Policy Institute itself has a bunch of issues to deal with. One is that it's like on the shit list of Charity Navigator, which is the organization that evaluates the veracity and effectiveness of nonprofits. And then it turns out that the Employment Policy Institute is actually run by a PR firm that's hired by the National Restaurant Association to lobby on behalf of restaurants, tobacco and alcohol.
That's right. Yeah, it's an interesting story. So if you ever get a chance to go on YouTube and type in Richard Berman, Dr. Evil. So Richard Berman is this very tall man, I think he's like almost 7 feet, big man, who was initially hired by Big Tobacco many years ago to essentially run their bullying campaign. You know, for many, many years before finally the lawsuits that basically destroyed Big Tobacco's ability to advertise to kids and all of that. For many years, Big Tobacco acted like the National Restaurant Association. They would attack anybody that tried to expose the truth around. Frankly, I don't know if you know, but people knew about the cancer-causing nature of smoking and cigarettes long before it was finally exposed to the public, 50 years prior. And it was Richard Berman who was hired to like fight anybody who tried to expose the truth. So when I started my work in 2002, the National Restaurant Association hired Richard Berman in 2003 to essentially go after me. He worked for Big Tobacco, and then he worked for the National Restaurant Association. And he, you know, he's a bully. He's a goon. And so he set up lots of attack websites, and he set up this fake entity called the Employment Policy Institute, which is a play on an actual very well-respected organization in Washington, D.C. called the Economic Policy Institute, EPI. He purposely set up the Employment Policy Institute to confuse people into thinking EPI, which is a very well-known think tank we work with, was saying we were bad and horrible and all of these things. So Richard Berman ran attack campaigns on me for years and years and years and years. And then in 2016, the National Restaurant Association hit upon an even better idea. Because now, you know, for so many years it was Richard Berman and the Restaurant Association versus Saru. What they saw Donald Trump do to the American electorate was this beautiful thing. He managed to get working people to vote against their own interests, to vote for billionaires rather than for working people's issues. And so they thought that was brilliant. They hired the Trump-Pence communications firm, Mercury PR, and they worked with Mercury PR to set up what they call an AstroTurf PAC. Are you familiar with the term AstroTurf? John Oliver on Last Week Tonight did a whole 30-minute episode featuring the AstroTurf that's been fighting it. AstroTurf is the opposite of grassroots. Grassroots is people actually organizing at the grassroots level and fighting for change. That's what we do. AstroTurf is fake grass. It's corporations creating fake grassroots organizations to fight against things that grassroots people fight for. So the National Restaurant Association created an AstroTurf PAC called Save Our Tips. And they hired people who posed as workers to say, if you raise our wages, our tips will go away. Save our tips, don't raise our wages. And they succeeded in terrifying workers in Maine and DC and New York and Massachusetts that if their wages went up, if they got an actual wage, their tips would go away. Now, anybody who's worked in California knows that is absurd and ridiculous. In California, San Francisco has the highest tipping average of any city in the United States. Alaska, which has had the same minimum wage for tipped and non-tipped workers for decades, has had the highest tipping average of any state in the United States and America. I'm still waiting to find that anthropology student who will go find out why do Alaskans tip better than everybody else. I think I have an idea, but I'd love somebody to do a study on it. In any case, it's just not true. People who are paid a full wage actually tip better than people in states because guess what? They can. They eat out more and they tip better. Any of you who worked in restaurants probably tip better than other people because you know what it's like to live on tips, and so you tip better. So when restaurant workers are paid better, they tip better and tipping goes up. But the Restaurant Association managed to convince terrified workers in other states that their tips would go away if their wages went up. Some of them. And what was interesting about that moment, and I know we have other questions, but I do have to share this really interesting thing that happened during that moment, which was that the people who responded most to that argument were white male servers in very fine dining restaurants and bars. And they came out with vitriol fighting us. You know, I mean, at one point we had to call Department of Justice because they were engaged. They threatened us physically. They were so angry that we wanted to raise wages. So we finally started infiltrating their meetings and holding focus groups to understand, why are they so angry about raising wages? Do they really believe their tips will go away if their wages go up? And in these focus groups, in these meetings, we heard these white male servers, very fine dining restaurants, say, we're professionals. We are not those friendlies waitresses. We deserve to make more money in tips. We deserve to make a lot more than them. They didn't like what we were doing, not because they thought their tips would go away, but because they thought it would bring friendlies waitresses, AKA women and women of color, up closer to where they were, and they believed that they were professional white men, server, bartenders who deserved to make a lot more. And it was during this Trump period that actually there was a whole series of articles in the New York Times about this phenomenon called last place aversion. This idea that some white people in this country will vote against their own self-interests because anything is better than being the same as the people who you always believe were below you. In other words, if the bottom who you think is less than you comes up, then the one thing you have as a worker, which is that you're better than somebody else, goes away. And so that was very interesting to see the way the Restaurant Association divided workers and made some believe that actually wages going up would be bad for them, when in fact that was a total farce. But those were the kind of campaigns that, you know, of disinformation and, you know, lies, basically, that Richard Berman and the likes of the Restaurant Association made.
Do you have like a personal practice to, I mean, some of this must just be like completely unnerving, agitating, frustrating. I mean, how do you process it and come back?
Yeah, I mean, especially all those years of, you know, restaurant workers. Now, mind you, they were a certain kind of restaurant, but some restaurant workers coming after me, even my physically coming after me. I had to, in some cases, walk around with a security guard because I would go to these meetings and there'd be these very angry, very big white men servers and bartenders trying to fight me. And I'm a restaurant worker organizer. I have dedicated my life. I, you know, have lost so much time with my children and so much hair fighting, you know, to organize restaurant workers. To have those same workers fight me and see me as the enemy is incredibly, that's the most painful. I can take the National Restaurant Association fighting me, but it was very painful to have workers fight us. And during those moments, it was really always centering the true people who are leading our fight, which is women and women of color in this industry who've been suffering with this for 160 years since emancipation, remembering that history, hearing their stories, you know, knowing they were being attacked as much as I was. And who am I? I'm a privileged person, and they're still earning $2.13 an hour. And so centering those, remembering those is what keeps me going even when it's very painful.
Thank you. There's a question here about what's the best way to recruit allies who are extremely pro-tip. How do you approach people that have a different orientation?
So first I want to explain, I am not anti-tip. Lots of people always confuse this. I am not fighting for getting rid of tipping. I am fighting for a full minimum wage in this country for all workers with tips on top. Now, some employers might choose to move to a full wage and have tipping included in a full wage, and that's great. That's their choice. But the policy we're fighting for is a full minimum wage with tips on top, just like we have right here in California. All we're fighting for is for the rest of the country to have what we have here in California, in Oregon, Washington, Nevada, Minnesota, Montana, and Alaska. It's pretty simple. Just a wage, a minimum wage. I ask you, what is the meaning of the word minimum? If the largest industry in America gets to pay so much less, minimum means the least you can earn. And this industry has gotten away with so much. So what would I say to people who, I wouldn't say are pro-tip, but who are pro-status quo, maintaining the sub-minimum wage? I would say that right now in this country, there's no future for all of us to be able to continue to eat out in the ways we've enjoyed eating out if we continue down this path. At the VIBE conference, the very important Beverage Executives Conference, when I spoke, I expected people to attack me, and instead this woman raises her hand after I speak, and she says, I just want to know, what is the future of our industry? If we don't address the wage issue, what's going to happen to us? And I said, you are going to shrink. That is the only future that exists. If wages don't go up, you will never have enough people willing anymore to work for these jobs and these wages, and so you're going to have to shrink. There is no other future. And so what I would say to anybody who wants to maintain a $2 wage is, okay, then let's accept that we're going to have a fraction of the restaurant and bar service that we've had in this country all along. We're not going to be able to enjoy the growth of the restaurant industry we experienced. We're not going to be able to enjoy the amazing food and service that we've experienced because people are no longer willing to work or able, not even willing, able to work for these wages. When the cost of a gallon of gas is more than your hourly wage, when it costs you more to get to work than you get when you get there, you are not going to keep that job or take that job. It's perfectly rational to say, I will not pay more than I get when I get to work, covering childcare and transportation and the cost of gas. It's impossible. And so there is no future, I would say, to somebody who's pro status quo, except to pay more.
So is there a vision where more restaurants become economically unfeasible to maintain, to be in business? And is there a part of your vision that imagines people eating more at home again, together as families at tables and cooking more? Or
I mean, that could be part of a collective vision we have together, because I know many people have that goal. I don't think paying people more is economically unfeasible. It clearly isn't in California. What is economically infeasible is paying people what they're paying right now, because people aren't coming back. So I think it's actually the opposite. The future is we pay people well. They are then able to make the choice, Will, to eat at home, spend time with their families, or to eat out. Because also, it's not just about all of us eating more at home. It's also about the fact that most working Americans, because half of America works full-time and lives in poverty, are forced to work 2 and 3 jobs and are not able to be with their children or eat at home. It's not even a choice. They have to eat out because they're working all the time. And so I imagine a future, like I said, where people who work in any industry have the ability to work and feed their children, have a home, eat at home, be able, for any of you who work in the industry, you know you live for Friday and Saturday night shifts. Nobody wants to work the Wednesday brunch shift or lunch shift. Nobody wants to work Monday or Tuesday. You get no tips. I imagine a world where a mom could actually work on a Tuesday or a Wednesday and be home with her children, eating at home on a Friday or Saturday night, even if she works in a restaurant. That doesn't exist right now.
There's a couple questions about the demographics of tipping. Is there data on what demographics tip the best? Do women tip better? Is there a difference in cuisine type of restaurant that pay workers better?
I'll answer the second one first. There is definitely no cuisine or type of restaurant that pays better or pays worse, except the chain restaurants are universally horrific. On the full service side, on the what we call limited service or quick service or fast food or fast casual sides, lovely how they love to use these words like fast casual or quick service because they don't want to be known as fast food, but that is what they are. So on that side, there actually are a number of companies that have broken away from the National Restaurant Association and are doing better. Cava Grill, In-N-Out, Sweet Greens are doing better, pay better. Even some provide benefits and are actually responsible employers. On the full service side, that's everybody from Applebee's, IHOP, Denny's, Outback, Chili's, Cheesecake Factory. There's not a single full service chain restaurant that has broken away from the cabal that exists among full service restaurants, this kind of like tight agreement they have that nobody will pay more than the $2. If I could get one of them to break away, it would be game-changing. And by the way, in that cabal, the 4 leaders are the 4 Ds, we call them. Denny's, Dine Equity, which is Applebee's, IHOP, Darden, which is Olive Garden, and like 10 other brands, and somebody you would never expect, which is Disney. Disney is a horrifically evil company that leads the other NRA and has fought us really vitriolically on raising that $2 wage.
You mentioned a large part of the food industry are farm workers. Have there been big changes for them because of COVID too, or in general policy?
Absolutely. We started something called the Food Chain Workers Alliance with workers across the food chain. We're seeing wage increases across the food chain. Farm worker organizers are telling us in some parts of the country nobody can find workers for less than $18 to $20 an hour on the farms right now. So there's been the same kind of revolt. The press called it the Great Resignation, which makes it sound like everybody was like sighing and sitting down. Our members say it's not a great resignation, it's a great revolution. They say we're finally recognizing our worth as humans. We deserve more than $2 or $10 or frankly even $15 an hour. So we're seeing that on the farms too.
I like this one. I want to pursue law school, and I was wondering, how did you narrow down your passions and find the sort of food systems career route that you did?
Oh, my story is not a good example for you. I was a child of immigrants who didn't know anything about college or law school. I graduated high school at 16. I got into Harvard, and my mother convinced me not to go because she was convinced I should not go to Harvard. I ended up going locally to UCLA because she wanted me to stay close to home. And then at 19, when I was deciding which law school to go to, of course, they couldn't advise me, and they couldn't afford for me to go look at schools, so I knew nothing. I only knew these names, Yale, Harvard. I never visited. I knew nothing about them. Again, got into Harvard Law. My parents didn't know. They're like, okay. But when I got into Yale Law, people around me at UCLA said, no, Yale is so much better. I said, okay. So I ended up creating a joint program between Yale Law and the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. So I did an MPP JD, not knowing anything, never having lived as an adult on the East Coast, never having seen snow falling from the sky. It was totally a total culture shock for me. So maybe that's a good story for what not to do. That's the exact opposite of what you should do, because I didn't know what I was getting into. And were I to do it again, I actually wouldn't go to law school at all, because law school doesn't teach you anything about change. Law school is, there's a phrase in Latin, right? It's stare decisis. The decision stands. Everything is about what exists, not what change you can make. Organizing for me is the way that I seek to make change in the world. And it's good to know law to do that, but it wasn't essential. And so the only thing I would say to people thinking about law school is, I was a pre-law advisor for many years, and my main advice was don't go unless you really know for certain that is really what you know what the work entails, you've seen it with your own eyes, you know that is definitely what you want to do, because most people don't go to law school knowing what lawyers do.
Did you have a mentor who helped you understand the world of organizing that you could talk about?
Thanks, Will. I had many mentors. I had a professor at the Kennedy School at Harvard who, Marshall Gans, some of you may know, worked with the farm workers with Cesar Chavez for many years. So I definitely learned some organizing from him. But in his class was a woman named Dinky Khorasan Suleiman, who was a leader in the movement to overthrow the Marcoses in the Philippines, the Marcos dictatorship in the Philippines. And I learned a lot. Mostly, I learned a lot from her, yeah.
Well, Saru's taught her own class this afternoon, came in to be with us tonight, and has to fly to Maryland. So we want to just thank her for being here with us. Next week. Dr. Christine Madsen is going to be leading the class. I'll be absent next week, and Sakina Shabazz from the Berkeley Food Institute will be here. Dr. Madsen was the faculty director of the Berkeley Food Institute for about 5 years. She is a pediatrician by training and decided that after many years as a pediatrician working with obese and diabetic children, that she was at the wrong place in the system to change it. So she came to Berkeley as a professor of public health and worked tirelessly to pursue the research which led to the soda tax bill. So she has a wonderful story. She's a wonderful teacher. She teaches the Transforming Food Systems course, which is part of the Food Systems Certificate. And Sakina is a Berkeley grad, got her Master's of Public Policy here, and is now teaching a class called Untangling, I think it's Unleashing or Untangling, the Farm Bill. And she's going to talk more about her work and help you understand a little bit more, building on what Nina Ichikawa talked about the first week, about how the Berkeley Food Institute may be of use and service to you. I guess the last thing I kind of realized tonight with my hero's journey story was that the hero's journey is really one of service. And I just want to thank you for your service. It's really inspiring year after year. So I'm going to turn it over to Viana, and she will help you with the assignment. And we'll see you next week. Thank you.